Greetings, dear comrades. On this day, August 10th, 2025, I present to your attention the traditional analysis of the situation on the front of combat operations. At the current moment, key changes are being recorded predominantly in the South Donetsk sector, Pokrovsk sector. In the Konstantinovka zone, a cauldron has formed which is being cleared. Modifications are also noted in the Seversk region. There is fresh data from the Krasnoliman, Kupiansk and Sumy sectors, which will be reviewed and analyzed in this material. Before beginning the main content, as usual, I sincerely urge you to subscribe to the channel. For those who repeatedly watch such materials but are not yet subscribers, please join us. Your support significantly contributes to the growth and development of the project. I express gratitude to all who have already subscribed. Kherson Oblast. Let's proceed to examining the situation in the Kherson region. Over the past day, only one aviation strike was registered here. In the area of Olgovka village, a Russian aviation raid occurred. Other marks relate to events of the last 48 hours. Overall, the front line in this sector remains stable. No current news from this region was received today. FPV drone activity continues along the entire perimeter of combat contact. Artillery of both sides is functioning, both Russian and Ukrainian, Orekov direction. Moving to the Orekov sector, we note the continuation of positional clashes in the area of Malaya Tokmachka. Certain information has been received from this zone. Russian units are attempting to penetrate into Malaya Tokmachka through its northern outskirts. Despite already achieved consolidation on the eastern periphery, Ukrainian forces are trying to carry out a counter-offensive from the southern direction against Russian troops, seeking to cut off the supply lines of the Russian grouping stationed in the eastern sector of Malaya Tokmachka. Additionally, Russian servicemen are being attacked by the AFU in the areas of Belogoria and Novopokrovka. The map has not changed today. I remind you that the cartographic situation has remained unchanged for 3 weeks straight. Information is coming in about ongoing positional battles in the area of Novoandreevka. However, positional clashes occur there daily. Similar actions are recorded in the area of Novodanilovka. Russian positions near Rabatino are also being attacked, Stepnogorsk and Plavny. Continuing the review, today information appears that Russian formations have consolidated, not only at the indicated point at the treatment facilities, but also cut the supply transport artery, which practically connects Stepnogorsk with Plavny and also leads directly to Stepnogorsk. Currently, Russian troops are gradually expanding the controlled territory south of Plavny. The situation with this micro-district is not yet clarified, whether all buildings are completely occupied by Russian forces partially, or whether Russian troops were expelled from these objects. However, data is coming in that Russian units have practically approached Stepnogorsk from the south side, simultaneously cutting off the AFU grouping located in Plavny itself. I remind you that earlier Ukrainian military attempted counterattacks, but Russian FPV drone crews eliminated the entire AFU assault group. 2 armored vehicles were also destroyed. Currently, there are separated AFU groups. Here, Russian troops are trying to bypass them to cut them off from supply, after which they plan pressure and taking Plavny under their control. Guliaipol direction. Moving to the Guliaipol direction, activation of the combat contact line in the area of Vysokoe is noted. A strike was carried out on AFU positions. I remind you that earlier in this area, Russian MLRS worked on AFU positions. And today video material arrived demonstrating a strike by a Russian FPV drone on AFU positions and personnel. The front line in the direction of Guliaipol has also become active, where Russian drone crews strike AFU positions in the area of Guliaipol, villages Vesoloye and Zeleny Gai. Additionally, attempts are being made to advance toward the settlement of Vysokoe. Otherwise, positional clashes are being conducted here. The map has not changed yet, but this is a matter of time. When video materials appear with advancement of either side, corresponding corrections will be made to the map, Malinovka and adjacent areas. Regarding Malinovka, news is coming in that Russian units are gradually beginning movement toward the village of Poltavka. Today, AFU positions in this area were attacked. Russian troops are also advancing toward Poltavka and toward Olgovsky from the villages of Lavadnoye and Vishnevy. Thus, the front line here has become active today. Perhaps at the beginning of the week, we will see advancement of Russian forces here. Aviation strikes are also being delivered in the area of Uspanovka village. Here, a strike was made on an AFU temporary deployment point. Today there are changes, more precisely, changes occurred over yesterday. It is reported that Russian troops expanded the controlled zone west of Novodarevka. Now news is coming that Russian units from Temirovka are clearing this pocket. Here 2 forest strips came under Russian military control, Temirovka. Regarding Temirovka, despite the statement by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation about the complete transition of Temirovka under Russian control, the AFU still does not cease attempts and counterattacks Russian positions. According to some data, while these sources are not entirely reliable, according to individual reports, the southern part of Temirovka is under Russian control, while the northern part remains under AFU control. Therefore, we continue monitoring the situation on this section of combat operations, Sechnevo and Alexandrograd. Next, we examine the settlements of Sechnevo and Alexandrograd. Here, Russian troops are expanding the controlled zone in the area of Malivka village, north of this settlement and advancing toward Sechnevo, and also expanding the control zone from the villages of Mirnoye and Podubnoye, moving toward Alexandrograd. I remind you that Malivka belongs to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Sechnevo also belongs to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Currently, one settlement is already under Russian control, and soon, possibly, a second settlement will pass under Russian forces' control. Kamishevaka. Regarding Kamishevaka, Russian troops strike AFU positions in the area of Kamishevaka and Novozhorgievka using FPV drones and artillery. As soon as we record FAB hits here, most likely after that, assault operations on these 2 settlements will begin. I remind you that initially FAB 500s hit AFU positions, and then assault actions follow. No FAB hits were registered today yet. Grushevskoye, Novokatskoye, and Zeleny Gai. Moving to the settlements of Grushevskoye, Novokatskoye, and Zeleny Gai, as is known, yesterday Russian troops took all this territory under control, and today information arrived from this section of combat operations. All this territory also passed under Russian control. Here advancement was up to 1 kilometer. We can confidently state that Russian troops will definitely clear the entire territory to the Volkhya River, which flows as indicated, and all this territory, possibly by the end of next week, will pass under Russian control. Russian troops also expanded the controlled zone in the area of Tolstoy village. Possibly Russian troops expanded the control zone earlier, but video materials only appeared today. AFU positions in the area of Andreevka-Klevtsova village are also being attacked. Pokrovsk direction. Moving to the Pokrovsk direction, no serious changes were recorded here today. Clashes continue in the area of Chunishino, in the area of Novopavlovka, in the areas of villages Kazatskoye, Promen and AFU positions in the area of Mirnograd city are also being attacked. Otherwise, positional combat operations are being conducted here today without changes along the combat contact line. The entire territory marked in red. These are changes over the past days, which were discussed in previous video materials. Rudinsk. Regarding Russian advancement in the area of Rudinsk village, no video materials about the presence of Russian military in Rudinsk have appeared yet. Although pro-Russian sources repeatedly reported that Russian military managed to consolidate in Rudinsk village. However, this information has not yet received confirmation. Advancement toward Vladimirovka. There is advancement of Russian troops on this section of combat operations. Here, advancement was up to 4 kilometers. Russian military are bypassing Mayak and Pankevka. This is where these settlements are located, and they are heading toward the supply road that leads to Vladimirovka. Here is located the supply road, which will most likely be physically cut off in the coming days. Also in the area of Nikonovka and Dorozhny, AFU positions are being attacked. According to individual data, Russian troops have already consolidated on the eastern outskirts of Nikonovka and began assault actions on this settlement. By the middle of next week, materials will definitely arrive here, since the delay in materials here is, based on practice, 2 to 3 days. Therefore, by Wednesday, most likely, Nikhanovka may already pass under Russian control, and also Russian troops may cut off the supply road to Vladimirovka. As is known, Vladimirovka is being attacked by Russia. However, the AFU has fortified areas here. Also, defensive lines in Vladimirovka are very strong, therefore Russians have not yet managed to approach very close and take this settlement. Therefore, we expect advancement of Russian troops in the indicated movement vector, and most likely, Vladimirovka by the end of the week may also pass under Russian forces' control. Rusin Yar. Regarding advancement on this section of combat operations, yesterday it was said that Russian troops consolidated in Rusin Yar, and video material arrived from this point. Today data is coming in that Rusin Yar has already practically passed under Russian forces' control. Russian troops also expanded the controlled zone today on this section of combat operations. Here, advancement was up to 2 kilometers, and the entire territory marked in red passed under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. I remind you that earlier reports appeared from this point, and today all this territory has already turned out to be under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Everything indicates that as soon as Rusin Yar is under Russian control, all this territory will be subject to clearing, since to avoid encirclement, the AFU will be forced to leave this territory if they have not already done so. We continue monitoring this section of combat operations. Stepanovka and Yablonovka. In the area of Stepanovka, Russian units are attacking AFU positions, however they have not yet consolidated in this settlement. Today news arrived that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced the complete transition of Yablonovka under Russian army control. Now Yablonovka is officially under Russian control. Konstantinovka direction. Formation of a cauldron. A cauldron has also formed here in the Konstantinovka direction. I remind you that earlier Katerinovka was already taken under Russian control, and according to individual data, it is reported that Russian troops entered Klebanbek and took a significant part of this settlement under their control. No video materials about expansion of the controlled zone have arrived yet, but if this corresponds to reality, then corrections will be made in the shortest time. Now news is coming that a cauldron has formed here, since the AFU can no longer leave this territory. As is known from the Alexander Kalinovo side, all transport supply arteries are under physical control. Additionally, now supply routes through Klebanbek are completely cut off, and the entire AFU grouping located in Sherbinovka, as well as on this section of combat operations and in these fields, found itself surrounded. Today data arrived that Russian troops are systematically clearing all this territory. The entire territory marked in red has passed under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation today, is completely cleared, and the entire remaining pocket is being systematically cleared. Most likely, by the end of the week, we will see complete clearing of all this territory here, if the AFU does not attempt counterattacks and unblock the transport supply artery for troop withdrawal. However, here AFU positions are also being attacked in the areas of Pleshchevka and Ivanopoli villages. Strikes were delivered on AFU positions at these points, thus we can conclude that the AFU will not be able to approach and unblock the supply road. Seversk direction. On the Seversk direction, no serious changes were recorded today. There are changes on this section of combat operations. This section of combat operations passed under Russian control. Also yesterday, these two sections passed under Russian forces' control, and news is coming that this entire pocket has actually already been cleared. News is also coming that Russian troops are pushing the AFU out of Serebryansk forest. I remind you, here the AFU had huge fortified areas, powerful fortified positions. This is how the AFU defense line passed. Here is located a huge number of fortification lines, and also Russian troops could not advance in Serebryansk forest, since a huge number of FPV drones functioned here against Russian positions, and all FPV drones were on fiber optic, against which EW did not work. Therefore, it was quite difficult for Russian troops to advance here. Otherwise, here today such news, AFU positions are being attacked in the areas of settlements Seversk, Zvanovka, as well as Kuzminovka. At this point, an AFU armored vehicle with personnel was destroyed. Krasnoliman direction. Moving to the Krasnoliman direction, in the area of Zaraknoye, Russian troops are expanding the controlled zone. As is known, yesterday Russian troops managed to enter Zareknoye, and today news is coming that Russian troops significantly expanded the control zone in this settlement. Perhaps in the next 2 to 3 days, we will make map corrections as soon as additional video materials arrive. And today, only this territory marked in red passed under Russian forces' control. Here, advancement was up to 500 meters. However, according to news coming from pro-Russian sources, it can be stated that the controlled zone here is already much wider today. At the time of video recording, Russian troops took most of Kolodezi under their control. Here, earlier information appeared that Russian military are expanding the controlled zone in this settlement, and today it is reported that the armed forces of the Russian Federation took this section of combat operations. Now the western part of Kolodezi remains for the AFU. Here, by the end of the week possibly, we will also see serious changes along the combat contact line. Kupiansk direction. Moving to the Kupiansk direction, no map changes came from this direction, but news is coming that Russian troops managed to seriously advance in Kupiansk itself, and combat operations were conducted at this point. According to reports from the Ukrainian side, 9 Russian attacks were repelled here. Thus, we can conclude that all this territory has already, most likely, passed under Russian forces' control, since the Oskol River flows here, and Russian troops are advancing along this river. If this corresponds to reality, if not DRG groups operated here, but regular troops, assault troops, then in the coming days the map will look accordingly. Regarding Moskovka village, according to individual data, most of this settlement has already passed under Russian forces' control. But this information may be premature, therefore we are not making changes here yet until we receive confirming information. Sumy direction. Moving to the Sumy direction, Russian troops struck positions, a temporary deployment point of the AFU in the area of Peshanoye village. Here an AFU temporary deployment point with personnel was destroyed. It is also reported that the AFU is trying to put pressure on Russian positions in the area of Alexeivka village. Currently, all AFU forces are directed specifically at this settlement, but the AFU has not yet managed to achieve success. All crews that advance toward this settlement are broken up with the help of FPV drones. I remind you, here, Russian forces have a huge number of FPV drone crews that do not allow Ukrainian military to seriously advance. I remind you that earlier, Ukrainian military took Kondratovka and Andreevka, and there were no more successes. Regarding Yunakovka, fierce combat operations continue here, but it seems that the front line has frozen here. Russian troops strike AFU positions and personnel in this settlement, but do not advance. Here, FPV drones function for the most part, not infantry, not assault groups. Tetkino district. News also appears from Tetkino district. Here strikes were delivered on AFU positions in the area of Rizhovka village. In turn, Ukrainian military struck Russian positions in the area of Tetkino village. Here, there was a strike on Russian positions, but no serious advancement was noticed. Otherwise, such is today's news. I express gratitude to everyone for watching. Don't forget to subscribe until we meet again.